Ja, also ich würde gerne beginnen, wirklich.
All right, let's start again to make use of the time we've left. I hope that you can all hear me well. I'd like to welcome you to this third session of the International Day. This is the first big international day at a German Senior Citizen Day, and it's a pleasure to do this together with our partners. And we would have loved to welcome you on site in person. Unfortunately, given the circumstances, this has not been possible. However, we set up a program for this limited virtual conference, and I'm sure that it's going to be interesting to all of us. In the first session this morning, we talked about specific situations in different countries. In the second session, we heard more about what other countries are doing, what is being done in order to protect human rights in certain areas, at least. And now we'll talk about what we can do, what we can contribute in order to protect the rights of older persons globally. For that, I would like to welcome our high-ranking panel later today, but before we will hand over to Amal Abou Rafeh. Amal Abou Rafeh recorded this presentation because she would like to celebrate Thanksgiving today with her family and her sick child. So we are very thankful to her. She's the chief of the program on aging at the United Nations. This morning, several times we've heard about a possible convention on the rights of older persons, and that is one of her tasks, to organize the talks about that topic and to organize that program on aging. And I hope that this is going to work out technically to now give the floor to her and see her presentation.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Amal Abou Rafeh, and I'm joining you from the Program on Aging Unit at the United Nations in New York. And I want to wish you all a very happy Senior Citizens Day in Germany. And also thank you for inviting me to join you in this afternoon's discussion on how we could secure the human rights of older persons worldwide. So to get this conversation started, let's go back to the venue where these discussions take place at the United Nations. Over 10 years ago, the General Assembly set up a working group to undertake the following: consider the existing international framework of the human rights of older persons, identify possible gaps in that international framework, identify how best to address these gaps, and consider the feasibility of further instruments and measures that would be required to strengthen the protection of the rights of older persons worldwide. So to help get this conversation started, I chose 5 main points on what can and should be done in promoting and protecting the rights of older persons worldwide. And the first one is believe the hype. Decision makers should believe the hype, because all societies in the world are in the midst of this longevity revolution. Some are at its very early stages and some are more advanced. But all will pass through this extraordinary transition in which the chance of surviving to age 65 rises from less than 50%, as was the case in Sweden in the 1890s, to more than 90% at present in countries with the highest life expectancy. What is more, the proportion of adult life spent beyond age 65 increases from less than a fifth in the 1960s to a quarter or more in most developed countries today. But this is not just a developed country issue. Africa and Arab states, who remain blinded by all things youth, are two regions that are expected to witness the largest relevant increase in the number of older persons. And we're talking about an increase of around 230% by 2050. The second point I wanted to make is that it's not either or, it's both. Development and human rights inform each other and are mutually beneficial. Such interlinkages have been recognized by member states in the international community time and again. Also, the Madrid International Plan of Action on Aging was one of the first documents to link the questions of aging to other frameworks of social and economic development and human rights. It also recognized the necessity to promote both development and human rights to further its vision for an inclusive society for all ages. In many countries, MIPA has guided drafting of policies, inspired the development of national plans, and provided and continues to provide an international framework and platform for dialogue. Let's be clear. Almost 20 years ago, MIPA highlighted the notion of dignity, celebrated longevity, recognized a life course approach, emphasized the existence of deep inequalities, highlighted the importance of expectations and preferences of older persons themselves. It recognized the contributions they make and called for stomping out stereotypes against them. But MIPA is not legally binding. It's a soft law without sanctions for non-performance. Having an international standard on the rights of older persons would advance the implementation and accountability of MIPA. Clearly, it's a win-win. The third point on what can and should be done, in my opinion, is linking this conversation to inequality. Here's an example. Despite having shrunk considerably, the difference in life expectancy at birth between low and high-income countries is still around 16 years. Inequality has surged to the forefront of the political debate at the United Nations. It results in stark disparities in access to health, education, housing, and other basic services that are essential to the enjoyment of economic and social rights. And discrimination remains a pervasive driver of inequality. Extreme inequality is a consequence as well as a cause of human rights deprivations. And many of the key determinants of inequality can be framed as manifestations of denials of internationally guaranteed human rights. We've learned from the pandemic the importance of advocating and highlighting the need for an invigorated agenda for older persons, one that would be included in regard to pro-growth policies to ensure that this group is not left behind, nor is it overlooked after the pandemic. And building stronger legal frameworks, both at the national and international levels, would hold states accountable and would help to advance the key policy interventions that are needed to tackle these inequalities. The fourth point I wish to make is to echo a message from my colleague Craig Mkhaber at the Office of Human Rights in New York, which is to recall the original sin. The absence of age is a clear ground of discrimination against older persons in the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, reveals a gap in the international human rights framework. This is why explicit reference to age in core international human rights treaties are scarce. And this is why many of national anti-discrimination laws fail to address ageism against older persons in a holistic manner. There is a global recognition of the particular human rights challenges older persons face. As the population continues to age and larger number of older persons are found in low and middle income countries, some of these challenges are bound to become more acute. Some national governments, particularly in recent years, have paid attention to normative gaps and to the need to afford special protection to older persons. However, these policies are inconsistent across the globe and do not generally indicate the presence of comprehensive legal, policy, and institutional frameworks for the protection of the human rights of older persons. And particularly lacking are mechanisms ensuring participation, accountability, and redress. At the international level, there is no dedicated international protection regime for the human rights of older persons, and existing human rights mechanisms have lacked a systematic and comprehensive approach to the specific circumstances of older men and women worldwide. So the fifth and final point that I want to make is the importance of sealing all information gaps. Now, here I've laid out several venues where the conversation of how to promote and protect the rights of older persons globally can take place. Of course, the mandate of the open-ended working group of the General Assembly that we had mentioned earlier remains a crucial step towards exploring existing gaps at the international level and protecting the rights of older persons. And as some of you may be aware, following the pandemic, the Secretary General leaned into this conversation and for the first time called on the Assembly to accelerate efforts to develop proposals for an international legal instrument to promote and protect the rights of older persons. But there are other venues as well. State parties to existing international instruments may wish to incorporate the situation of older persons more explicitly into their reporting, although from what we've been hearing from the High Commissioner on Human Rights that does not happen enough. Also, special procedure mandate holders should dedicate attention to the situation of older persons and their dialogues with member states. And we've already seen the independent expert on the rights of older persons reach out to other colleagues, hold joint meetings and joint statements together to do exactly that. But the information gap that I'm talking about is exemplified here with this purple arrow. You may recall the final report of the United Nations 75 Years Dialogue. On page 30 of that report, there was a recommendation that said governments should take steps to ratify and support universal rights of people with disabilities and promote the creation of a UN convention to protect the rights of older people. This was such a useful ammunition and a particularly powerful one because it reflected the people's priorities for the future we want at the United Nations. But if you look at the recently published report of the Secretary General called Our Common Agenda, you do not see that message reflected there. And this is why we need to seal all gaps. And the strongest way to do that is to use the advocacy duct tape. I thank you for your attention, and I hope that these 5 points are helpful in your discussions this afternoon. From all of us here at the United Nations DESA Program on Aging, we wish you all the best. Thank you.
Ja, danke, Amal. Schade, dass wir uns jetzt
Thanks, Amal. What a pity that we can't meet in person, and congratulate you for your interesting presentation. Of course, this is all very useful. In particular, I found it crucial to hear that we're talking about different levels of jurisdiction. It's national and international legislation, and they don't exclude each other. Neither does the attempt to improve the situation of old people as set forth in the Universal Madrid Plan to have a binding framework. And this leads me to my panelists. First of all, I'd like to welcome Tarja Halonen. For 2 mandates, she's been the president of Finland from 2000 to 2012. And before,
She was very active in policy. She was Ministry for Social Affairs and Health, Minister of Justice, and Foreign Secretary. And still today, she's closely cooperating with the United Nations. For the time being, she is member of the mediation committee of the General Secretary of the High Commission, and she is trying to promote sustainable development via health and gender equality. Mrs. Halonen, we're very happy to have you amongst ourselves as a panelist. And my second panelist will be Dr. Claudia Mahler. Since 2020, she's been the independent expert for the rights of the elderly at the United Nations. She's gonna work there for 3 years. The first year, let's say 6 months have already passed, and we're appreciating her work and the different agreements she has already fostered and initiated. You're also responsible at the Institute for Human Rights in Germany for economic, social, and cultural human rights. And for quite some time, you've concentrated on human rights for the elderly, and you're fostering these rights. Thank you very much for joining us. And then we have Professor Morten Kjaerum. He's director of the Wallenberg Institute for Human Rights in Sweden and extraordinary professor at the Alba University. By the way, he's been the first director of the Agency of the European Union for Human Rights, FRA, in Vienna. We had already a presentation from Joanna Gooday from this agency. He's got comprehensive international experience in human rights activities and national as well as international bodies membership on EU and UN level. Welcome, Professor Kjaerum. And fourth will be Professor Dr. Matthias von Schwanenflügel. Since 2014, he's been the head of Department 3, Demographic Change, Older People and Welfare at the Federal Ministry for Family Affairs, Senior Citizens, Women and Youth. We're always happy about the close cooperation with you. And I've already introduced all of you. And now the participants can also find the participants' CVs in the chat in brief. And Mrs. Halonen, I would request you to take the floor. Thank you.
Okay, so guten Tag. Guten Tag.
Hello and good afternoon.
Just I want to congratulate you for the idea to have a Senior Citizens Day. That's one thing. The second, I would love to be there in Germany, but better internet than nothing. So I think that you mentioned a long list what I have done, but I'm also have been just recently the member of the World Health Organization's COVID-19 Pan-European Commission, and I think that some very fresh experiences what we have from this time of the COVID-19 could be also useful. So the pandemic COVID-19 has been like all the other disasters. It's like a magnifying glass that shown and amplify the existing problems of our societies. And so concerning the protection of the senior citizens during this pandemic, we have seen it very clearly. Of course, we knew already beforehand that senior citizens, the people over 70 years old, will be a fragile group for in this pandemic time, and so we try to do it in different ways how to protect. Of course, all countries, we have taken the possibility to have a vaccination, the vaccine for the elderly people, and then we have also tried to look after their circumstances. But then one of the issues what we have done is that in the most of the countries and also in Finland, we hope that we will avoid visiting the senior citizens so that we could protect them. But this has also the negative side because senior citizens, the older people, they actually felt very strongly that it has also the discriminatory effect. Isolation of the older people in the beginning of the pandemic ended up with the causing serious problems when they were very close relations with their family members or if they were already in the institutions. So it was for some of the senior citizens also the feeling that they didn't quite understand what was happening. But even those who have been more independently living at home, so of course all these measures what we try to use to help them had also this discriminatory side. So I think that this is also concerning the other people. It's very important to notice that our meaning can be a very good one, but the results have also both the positive and negative sides. But I would say that we senior citizens, I'm already also quite much older than 70 years, the people themselves have been very active and understanding mainly that what they have to do by themselves. They have been very careful with their measures and they have been active in vaccination processes. And so I think that that's the good side, to see that they have seen earlier also the more other difficult situations, so they are in that way active citizens. But I think that when you asked us to keep only the 5 minutes, so I keep the orders and I try to be active if you allow also afterwards. Thank you.
Ja, herzlichen Dank Ihnen, auch dass Sie sich an die Zeit gehalten haben.
Thank you very much also for sticking to the time limits. I think and I hope that there will be possibility for a discussion once we've carried out our podium presentation. Mr. Kjaerum, could you please take the floor and report about your experience? Thank you.
Thank you very much for letting me in on this panel, and also thanks a lot for this very important initiative. As it was mentioned several times this morning, it is overdue to lift the rights of elderly people higher on the human rights agenda. So I think you're really doing a great work here. When we look across continents, it is very often older people that are left behind in times of crisis, such as tsunamis, armed conflicts, and as Ms. Halonen just said also during the corona crisis, the COVID-19 crisis. And this crisis in particular has highlighted the extreme vulnerability that many older people live in. Unfortunately, we may actually need a crisis like the COVID crisis to really have our eyes open for issues that definitely are also there before. Because it's not only in times of crisis that the elderly people are being left behind. It's definitely also in the everyday life where they live. However, in the light of the COVID-19 crisis, there is a window of opportunity to address how societies should move forward, protecting human rights better for everybody, including the elderly people. How do we protect and fulfill human rights better? Globally, this is being discussed by the UN Secretary General. And of course, I share what Ms. Rafeh just said, that it's unfortunate that the elderly persons are not mentioned in the document, Our Common Future, which is a very strong document from the UN Secretary General. However, I do see it as an integrated part of what he talks about when he talks about the new social contract. The old social contract is broken. We need to rebuild a social contract that creates stronger social cohesion, trust, and solidarity. So in that integrated thinking, we have a very powerful document in my eyes with the UN Sustainable Development Goals, the so-called SDGs, the 2015 agenda, or the 2030 goals, which exactly, if they are realized, if they are fulfilled, can bring about the coherence and solidarity. So now the good question is, who will drive this? Is it the states or who are they? And this is where I think we have some good news. Because the most rapidly growing human rights movement these years are the networks of human rights cities. When we ask cities today, why do they choose to become more focused on human rights, apply a human rights-based approach in their everyday life as drivers in their cities? We basically hear three things. First of all, they want to do better. So that's nice. They want to be a better city. That's very good. Secondly, they definitely react to authoritarian, illiberal trends. We see a number of cities in some of the countries going a more illiberal direction, in Eastern and Central European countries now devoting themselves much more to human rights. And we see that at all continents. And then finally, this third one, which I think in this regard is particularly interesting, and that is a reaction to new public management and the neoliberal economy. There's no doubt that the neoliberal economies and new public management has contributed to weaken not only the social contract, but also features of the welfare state. Focus has been moved from the citizen or the rights holders to the institutions, key performance indicators, the economy. We all know it. It takes away attention from the actual aim of what we are going to do. So what does a human rights city do differently? I mean, first of all, this is not about offering a human rights prize or a particular event on Human Rights Day on 10th December. It is cities that integrate human rights in their policies and strategies. It's about integrating human rights in the key aspect of the deliverables of cities. When I talk about cities, it's also regions and smaller places. So the key areas here that we have identified are the city as service provider, as democracy provider, as employer, often the biggest employer in the neighborhood, responsible for the public space, accessibility for persons who are visibly impaired or have disabilities in various ways, or older people. So there's a whole host of areas where the cities and the local governance structures have responsibility. The basic tools they work with is not sort of, this is yet another legal framework and we will sue you if you don't live up to these standards. That's not what it's about. It's first and foremost a perspective, a framework for how you do your work as a city. And the three pairs are transparency, accountability, it's non-discrimination and equality, and engagement and empowerment. And in particular, I think the latter is very important. Engage cities in finding solutions to the problems. Ask the older persons in the neighborhood, how would you like to live? What are the challenges? And is it done? Not very often, unfortunately. What key officials say when we talk to them about these issues, key officials in human rights cities, in human rights-based hospitals, in institutions, we see them coming up a lot of places, and there's a lot of interesting elements being harvested. But that is that it creates, the human rights-based approach create an alternative or another perspective than the traditional economic perspective that has sort of been the only or the main perspective for very many years. So with that, I think we have a possibility to now upscale the fulfillment and protection of rights of the older people in the future, as well as other people, of course, living in the cities. So just to wind up, when we see at the overall level, probably some hostility against human rights, we see movements, illiberal, authoritarian movements at the national level. We see a tremendous, and this is global, a tremendous bottom-up approach from cities, from education institutions, civil society, etc. So there is a certain tension currently globally between the national and the bottom-up. So with that, thank you very much. Sorry for going a little bit beyond my time.
Ja, herzlichen Dank Ihnen für diesen interessanten Einblick in die.
Thank you very much for this interesting insight into your activities that you're carrying out within the human rights in cities, which reveals how important the local level is, on which there is room for action, where people live and where they have a connection with human rights. I think this is quite an exciting connection that you just highlighted. And this leads me to Claudia Mahler. I'm happy to have you today, and I'm very excited to have your talk on our question, which is maybe not a question for you, but hopefully you can share your experience on that. Thank you very much, and also thanks to the organizers of this interesting conference and the International Senior Citizens Day. And as an independent expert on rights of older persons of the United Nations, I'd like to thank you for your invitation. Securing human rights worldwide, what can and should be done? From my point of view, it's evident there is a lot to do in public relations work, in discussions and action in order to raise awareness in the public and also appeal public interest for the human rights of the elderly, with a view to the fact that today is the International Day against for violence against women, and older women are not incorporated, and this shows that there is a blind spot in our thinking, and it is important to break up these silos, these thinking silos. We're not only discussing human rights of older people, but older people are women are people with disabilities, may have an indigenous or migration background, and it is important to reveal this intersectional thinking in order to raise awareness in the public. I appreciate that Morten Kjaerum said that the older people have to be uplifted in the hierarchy of human rights. It can't be true that this big group is overseen, and unfortunately, I must say that we have to talk about a negative development on national level. We couldn't incorporate it in the German coalition agreement that the older people will become a focus of their attention, which I feel very sorry for. And unfortunately, policy or politics in favor of senior citizens is not being carried out as it should throughout the globe. But going back to my role as independent expert, I'm the only member of the body of the United Nations focusing on older people. There is no convention focusing on senior citizens' human rights. When it comes to non-discrimination, you will never find age as reason for discrimination. And this is why it is so easy on national level to find an excuse to say discrimination due to age is not taken seriously. And this is one of the major blind spots, even if the European Union has already laid out some framework orientations. It's not our entire life that's been protected, and I think this has been sufficiently discussed all over the globe. I can say that age has never been in the foreground, and when it comes to discrimination, it's never been addressed so far. And this is why I'm delighted that you also address the COVID-19 crisis, and we've seen that there were major infringements against human rights, and older people were overproportionally impacted. However, if, like today, the novel developments, Mr. Kjaerum has already addressed them, and Rafeh as well, senior citizens are not a focus of societies, but there are also some positive aspects to report, like a new resolution in the framework of the Geneva Human Rights Council that have taken into account my mandate, saying we would like to address ageism and age discrimination. And ageism, as you all know, is a global phenomenon. But here we can also focus on the healthy aging decade that is actually promoting it to fight ageism. And I can imagine that this area may also drop back on the human rights cities that can make a major contribution in order to see how we can combine the SDGs with age. There are mainly no indicators where senior citizens have been incorporated in the SDGs. And from my point of view, this is a major gap that needs to be overcome. And I would be happy because we have two representatives of the Nordic states. If the Nordic states would also focus on the priority of older people. We need some human rights champions in this area, and Europe is still looking for improvement. So I can unfortunately say that from my worldwide view. I just come back from Finland, and it's great that our country mission succeeded, even though I've been in my mission for 1.5 years. This was the first country mission and the first visit to another country due to the COVID-19 crisis, but I hope that more dialogue will be fostered in the future. Well, what else can we do? From my point of view, there are 3 things to do. We need to put age in the foreground and tell the political actors that this is important and create networks to exert pressure, because in many countries, the message hasn't been arrived. Older people are there to fight for their rights, and they need to be reinforced, and it is now high time to do it. If it's not COVID-19 that has revealed it, I don't know whatever instrument we might need. Thank you very much for your attention. Mrs. Mahler, thank you very much for your appeal, very strong appeal. And thank you for pointing out that we're not only old, but at the same time we're women or disabled persons. And this interlinkage may reinforce discrimination and inequalities. Now I'd like to pass the floor to Matthias von Schwanenflügel, and then we'll also go back to Mrs. Halonen, because you're a representative of Finland. Mr. von Schwanenflügel, the floor is yours. Good afternoon, Mrs. Mollenkopf. And I'd like to greet the German Senior Citizens Day with the federal president. We initiated the conference, and this is something that I will recall. And I'd also like to say good afternoon to Mr. Müntefering, the president of BAGSO. We all know that COVID-19 has reinforced the rights gap for older people and children. In Germany, we had hard times of, let's say, concluding people, and it's revealed that the protection of senior citizens' human rights is still showing many gaps that need to be overcome. And we've also seen that there is room for improvement for all of us. We've got human rights legislation, but this is not really applied as it should according to age, and we've got the implementation committees for, let's say, economic and social rights or the civil agreements, social agreements that are not specifically addressing older people. And we see that there are blind spots or that there are just gaps to fill. And on this backdrop, Germany and Austria have carried out the so-called gap study, defining and analyzing gaps for the High Commissioner of Human Rights. And this study shows it quite clearly where there is need for improvement. And this is why I'd say we can jointly say that things have to be improved. And Dr. Mahler already said it, and I'm happy to see that in the third committee, there has been a follow-up to the Second World Assembly on Aging in the third commission that has been adopted, demonstrating what human rights mean to senior citizens and what needs to be done, and also passing a mandate on the Open Working Group on Aging, renewing this mandate, and Germany is part of it. And Germany has always clear that Germany wants to have an active share in the discussion. And we've also said that we're prepared, going back to the gap study, that we are now going to identify the gaps in concrete terms. And Germany is also prepared to close these gaps. I do hope that Argentina, with its presidency in the open-ended working group, coming up with a proposal for further proceedings. And in that case, we should jointly ask Argentina how it's going to work during the next session during Easter 2022. There were discussions in civil society and national representatives. For Germany, I can say that we've made several requests via our permanent representative in New York, but we should also use the OECD Minister Conference that will take place next year, where it's going to be about the Madrid International Plan on Action. And Amal and I, we're of the same opinion. It's not about either or. MIPA is soft law, of course, as many people call it. And on the other hand, the open-ended working group on aging exists. This is working on a convention. And we shouldn't say either or, we should say both. Both should continuously and jointly join forces of soft law, of OECD and convention, and leverage all possibilities available to go into the future. I can only say that Germany is prepared to do so. We are oriented to go this path together with the civil society. Germany is prepared to continue the discussions in a constructive manner and to discuss the gaps. And Germany is also prepared, once we have found a result, a conclusion, to say we'll close these gaps. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you very much, Mr. von Schwanenflügel, and thank you for always contributing to the discussions at the national level and also in New York. Now I would like to hand back to Ms. Halonen, who only had limited time in the beginning and was also mentioned. So please, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. So thanks very much for very, very good thoughts, discussions, what you have had already after that. So the first, I think that concerning the aging, the state of mind is very important, because when we are living, we have lived quite a long time in the atmosphere of youth and the young people and children, everything very fine. I mean that, of course, they are of future, but they are also the important part of the presence. But then, of course, aging is something positive because we all hope to have a long life. I think in all cultures, we are hoping during the birthdays that have a long life and so on. And now when we have achieved quite the part of that, now we think that now it's a problem because our societies are now perhaps the first time in the human history facing the fact that we are really aging. And I think that that's good to remember. We have to learn it. So then second question was that how to act in different levels. And so, of course, we all have know this system, individual and then the local cities and the others, and then regional like EU, and then we have the international level. And all that should be done at the same time. And I think that SDGs, the Sustainable Development, have been a good lesson for us because it's not the command politics. You cannot just to tell that how the people should behave and how the states or cities should behave, but we need also not just and also the input by themselves, like we now need also by the aged people. So I think that we should have a closer observations at all levels and see how to do. I welcome very much this contribution by Morten Kjaerum because Finland, like also the other nodes, we have been very active in this moment. But then also to see that in which way we could help this one. Of course, in sustainable development, we have both the economical development, we have the ecological development, and then we have the social justice. All of these are needed at the same time. And I have been very often asked that when it's a question of the human rights, that are the human beings only the white middle-aged men because all the other groups have their special agreements. And I have tried to explain, I said, the human rights system is like a warm blanket which should protect us all. But then if you see that they are the host, that not everybody is protected as well as it should be, so to be patched. And that's concerning children, it has been concerning disabled people, it has been concerning many other these issues. Of course, now the blanket is quite full of the patches. And that's why also the new social contract, what was already mentioned, might be the certain idea that perhaps we need a new blanket. But I share your worried about the time we have now, that even we are criticizing very strongly these old conventions. So sometimes I'm a little bit unsure that whether we could, with this atmosphere we have today in Europe, whether we could create the better ones. So let's try to see the combination, that which are the most needed patches like this concerning the rights of the senior citizens, but then also to see that whether in, for instance, at the UN level, whether the new agenda for the future by the Secretary General, our common future, common agenda, that we could also see that whether the social side, social justice side could be stronger and we should be active in order to say that it means also the old age people. And I think that's okay. And then the last question by the Claudia, you asked that what about the Nordic countries? You know that even Finland has been very active concerning the human rights and also tried to create a good national system protecting the old people. Some of our people and experts and activist groups, they have seen that gave one new patch to the old blanket of the human rights, that why can't we do it in other ways stronger? So I think that if the patches are needed, so we do it. But then we should also to try to see that whether there are more structural difficulties, like Morten said already, that for instance, local authorities, cities and so on, that they are quite much also responsible to see it not only as an organization, but also to see it with the eyes of the individual persons and also we, the active persons. So this is, I think, now more or less what I got from this. And just finally, the Nordic countries have a long experience concerning the welfare state. And you are quite correct when you remind me that we have had a certain kind of the preschool education in sustainable development by this. And that's why I think that we have considered that the sustainable development is nothing especially new, because we have built our systems over the generations and also trying to include different people on that. So why not? We should use to be, you called us the pioneers, but I think that at least an open-minded and rowdy, how could I say, speakers in that sense. Thank you. I take your revenge. Okay.
Yeah. Danke. Yeah, Herr Kjaerum.
Thank you very much. Mr. Kjaerum, you wanted to say something?
Yeah, thank you very much. I just saw there were some very interesting questions in the chat on the human rights city issue. So if you would allow me 2 minutes to respond to that.
Gerne.
Thank you. No, the first one is sort of the link to SDG 11, which actually flags the cities. If we go back to the Millennium Development Goals, those that came before the SDGs, the cities did not exist. So certainly we see here the cities coming in a new way. And I must say, I talk more and more about the 2015 framework. Sort of 2015 actually being a milestone in our work, in the sense that we got the SDGs, we got the Paris Agreement, the SDGs with SDG 11 on the cities, the Paris Agreement, which would not have moved without the cities. The cities were extremely important movers in actually realizing that agreement. Both agreements are firmly anchored in human rights, and they are global. So we see a very dramatic shift in many ways in 2015. And that is exactly that agenda that cities are embarking upon, because it's holistic, it's sort of bringing in. We know all the old discussion about civil political rights and economic social rights on the other side. When you read the SDGs, it's not there. When you work on these issues at the local level, it's totally irrelevant with these divides, because it's all integrated. So I think that is an important driver, and why, so to say, what I spoke about human rights cities, the SDGs and the 2015 agenda is intimately linked. Second question was on the age-friendly cities. We have a lot of these city labels. We have the rainbow cities, we have the child-friendly cities, and the age-friendly cities, etc. That's all fine. I have absolutely no problems in that. But what the human rights city, sort of say, framework does is that it pull it all together. What we hear from officials from human rights cities, or cities that work with human rights, is that it sort of breaks down, or at least opens the silos. So those working on gender, disability, elderly, all in various silos, they certainly get a common non-discrimination approach or inclusion approach. They start interacting. What is it that we can learn, pick up from the one or the other area? How can we actually move in a more coherent way? So, and then it's also, let's say, it's not only a department in the city, but it's sort of an overall policy. Just one little element that I cannot resist, but in some of these institutions, and in particular a hospital that we are working with, when they turned into become a human rights-based hospital, the sick leave in the among staff went down to a third, simply because it was much more rewarding. Did it cost more? We haven't got the calculations yet, but our assessment is no. It's actually, there may be savings when you start looking at, so to say, the sick leave and other things. So, thank you very much.
Ja, danke. Sehr interessant. Müssen wir weiter verbreiten. Herr von Schwanenflügel, Sie haben sich auch dazu gemeldet.
Mr. von Schwanenflügel, you raised your hand. Yes, in regards to the gaps study, the study showing the gaps in the human rights structure, we had this document translated, as you could read in the chat. Ms. Völker posted the link. And I just wanted to point out that you can find it there. And then Age Platform asked in the chat, what about the European level? So this GAPS paper deals with international law mainly, but also includes regional law. Now, Age Platform here in the chat is asking whether this discussion can be brought to Brussels. And yes, maybe we can invite the Age Platform to participate, and also Austria, because we have financed this together. Now, in regards to New York and the working group on aging, we have asked the Argentinian presidency to put this paper on the agenda, and I hope that this is going to work out. During the last meeting, during the Easter, we had a discussion with Austria on this paper, and the author of the paper was also there. So we hope that the official agenda will deal with this paper next year. And then it's important that civil society, and I'm sure that's going to be the case, will closely follow those developments. And the way you always do, raise your voice and make sure that those in charge feel the pressure. Well, thank you very much. And now, since we don't have much time left, I wanted to give Claudia Mahler the chance to comment on what has been said. And then we're getting to the end of this event, and I would then like to hand over to our chairman, Mr. Müntefering. But first, Ms. Mahler. Yes, thank you so much for all those interesting contributions. Now, just to let you know, the open-ended working group on aging that will take place next year, we will discuss the topics of economic security, including life standards and adequate life standards and human rights. Cities, age-friendly cities are welcome to contribute as well. We would like to show all the positive aspects of active participation of older persons, and also this is linked to the SDGs. We need to give older persons a voice. We are the experts commenting on that topic, but it's important to keep this topic on the agenda and to focus on that. Now, I know that we are running late, so I'm not going to go into detail, but I'd love to see us working together closely, and most of the text I'm working with have been translated to German already. Thank you very much for all those interesting contributions. I hope that many of us have been inspired in the course of the day, and now maybe thinking about what they can contribute to improve the rights of older persons in every city and country, everywhere in the world. And before I hand over to Mr. Müntefering, I would like to thank all the organizers. I would like to thank our simultaneous interpreters And I would also like to thank our partners. Now, Mr. Müntefering, you have the floor. Yes, hello everyone. Sorry for being late. There were so many things we had to take care of that I couldn't be here earlier. I would like to thank Ms. Mollenkopf for her work. We have been on the board of BAGSO, and I know that she has been very active always, and we know how important it is to not only look at your own country, but also include the international perspective when it comes to the rights of older persons. I would also like to thank Mr. von Schwanenflügel and all the other panelists. Now, let me share my perspective on the situation in Europe. When we talk about the fact that age shouldn't be a negative point, a disadvantage, then we, the older persons, need to make sure that we also keep young people in mind. So what is age? Now, I'm 81 years old, almost 82, and when I was 21, I was allowed to participate in general elections for the first time. Now, 18-year-olds can vote, and we are talking about whether 16-year-olds should be allowed to vote. So when we talk about age, the first question is what happens with old people, but also what happens with other age groups? How are we dealing with that if 18-year-olds and 16-year-olds think that that's an important topic for them as well? And maybe you'd say, okay, it's not a good thing that this is not part of the coalition agreement in the new German government, but we continue to talk about age. Now, in Germany, you couldn't say that older persons have a negative image. Now, in my generation, of course, after 1945, after the Second World War, we were dealing with grandparents who were responsible for a world war in Europe. And of course, for us, it was very difficult to identify with that. And so that is something that's still in us. We didn't want to learn from our grandparents, and that impacted our relationships as well. Now, the first human right is education, and also old and older persons can claim that right. They need to be able to inform themselves, and of course, for that, they need to be open to new possibilities, to new technologies, to learn and get information. Now, traditional education and the digital sphere, this needs to be accessible for older persons as well. And that is why this kind of media continues to be important in our society. And secondly, work. In 1998, we started a German government and decided to change the age for retirement from 58 to 65, going up now to 67. Usually it's about 62, 63 in average when people retire. So I don't know what's the case in other countries, but that is one of the most important steps. That's when you say someone is old because that person is retired. So maybe many years ago that was different, but I'd say that the retirement age Well, that's something where societies are simply mistaken. We decided as a society that at a certain age, be it 58 or 67, a person is old and should retire. But every individual is different. Some are still healthy and fit and would like to continue to work, and others may want to retire early. Now, maybe we shouldn't only look at our ability to work in relation to age. Now, many people in that age group still are working, about 25% because they have to, and others because they want to. They want to feel needed. And that is why I'm saying we need you. You're experienced, you know something, so continue to be part of it. This is why it's going to be mandatory to have municipal senior citizens councils, not like elected representatives, but with a clear mission to represent the perspective of older persons in local parliaments and councils. And that's so important to have that, because there are differences, and we as older persons can still play an important role, but of course we need to engage. Now, I always say that people should be able to grow old self-determinedly. But then you can say, oh, the state should organize that for me. We need to make sure that we seize the opportunities to make use of our rights. So we need to mobilize ourselves. And then when people say you need to commit yourself, it's not happening on its own. That seems to be an important message to me. In Germany, we need a different legislation for the competences of municipalities. Now, this is different in all the countries, but here municipalities have to make sure that there are enough daycare centers and schools, but they don't have to take care of having enough nursing homes and senior citizens residential institutions. So for that, of course, municipalities need the necessary financial means. What's the difference right now? For an old person in Germany, the question is, do you live in a rich city or a poor city? Because a poor city cannot just take up more debt in order to help their people. Well, in general, I would like to say thank you all for the good work in other European countries and all over the world, well knowing that the population is growing also in Germany. In the next years, we'll have not 21, but up to 30% of people over the age of 62. And that is going to be another challenge. Now, the central idea is this: all people are equal. That's the foundation of democracy, and that's what we need to get back to. In 1948, after two terrible world wars and two terrible atomic bombs in Japan, Eleanor Roosevelt pointed out how important that equality is, and colonies were given up, got independent, and the fact that all humans are equal became the foundation of democracies. Now, whenever that principle is being violated for older persons, but also other minorities, looking at Poland, Hungary, or the United States under Trump, that's when people got further away from democratic values. Now, here in Germany, half a year after the Human Rights Declaration in May of '49, the German basic law says that the human dignity is the most important thing, and we need to make sure that it's being protected. Here in Europe, in Germany and other European countries and all over the world, not only the rights of older persons, but the rights of everybody. So again, thank you all for your good work. From a personal standpoint, my generation was born in 1945, 49, and Europe was such an important opportunity for us when we were told that the French and Italians would come to Germany to be our friends, living in peace after the terrible war. Then many of us were with our hearts more European than German. And over time, we have learned to accept our own country, which was difficult when we were younger. We had to learn to accept our own country. But again, thank you all for your commitment. And BAGSO, the German National Association of Senior Citizens Organizations, and the members of our members, 8 to 9 million persons in that age group, are part of that. And, you know, for politicians, that's their constituency. So for all those votes, let's continue our fight. I'm pleased to conclude the International Day of our Senior Citizens Day, and I wish you all the best. Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Mr. Müntefering. What you've just said, that all humans are equal, is the foundation for what we do and what we fight for, the rights of older persons worldwide. Thank you, and thank you all for your contributions, for sharing your insights, and for everything that you are doing. We are together in this, and as we say, all of us together will be able to do that. Don't you think? I'm not sure by when we'll be achieving what we're looking for, but I'm sure that in the end we will. Now, I would like to ask you to take another family picture. So yes, get the hair ready, activate your camera again.
Nochmal für ein gemeinsames.
And then we'll take another screenshot at the end of this event.